Voters across Maine, Nevada, North Dakota, and South Carolina voted in primaries that put former President Donald Trump's influence to the test. In South Carolina, Congresswoman Nancy Mace came out on top, beating out a few primary challengers. Mace has been a controversial candidate after voting with House conservatives to oust former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, and also flipping her stance on Trump, now supporting his re-election bid. Her run highlighted the GOP's divide inside the party, with Trump's side winning this time. And over in Ohio, a relatively unknown special election for the state's 6th congressional district turned into the biggest news of the night when Democratic candidate Michael Kripchak had some unexpected momentum, almost flipping Ohio's deep red district. Joining me now to help untangle last night's primary results is the Hill's Niall Stanage. Niall, thank you so much for being here. I want to jump right into last night's results. Going to South Carolina, Congresswoman Nancy Mace won her primary, but former Speaker Kevin McCarthy was seeking revenge against her for voting to oust him last year, and he backed, of course, challenger Catherine Templeton. Niall, do you think Mace's win was a sign that Trump's power in state primaries remains really as strong as ever?
I think that's part of it. Now, I do think the Congresswoman has her own personal following. She's a very mavericky kind of character. She frustrates some Republicans a lot, but she also won this primary by a really quite easy margin. She has clearly made herself much more of a Trump ally than she was at other points, particularly in the wake of the January the 6th Capitol riot. But that closeness to the former president appears to have paid off for her, at least in the context of last night's primary.
So moving to Nevada, Niall, we know that retired Army Captain Sam Brown won the Republican Senate nomination. No surprise there. But we know Trump issued a very last-minute endorsement of Brown earlier this week. Do you think his win was a sign of what's to come in the key battleground state of Nevada this presidential election?
I think it's tough, to extrapolate from primaries toward general elections in some ways. Now, it's certainly true that the Republican nominee, as you say, has the backing of former President Trump. It's notable that his Democratic opponent, Senator Jackie Rosen, has already been trying to paint her opponent as a MAGA extremist. Now, Nevada was obviously a state that President Biden won in 2020. It's interesting in our polling average here from the Hill and Decision Desk HQ, Mr. Trump now leading in that state. That's seemingly part of a pattern where among the battleground states, Trump seems in fact a little stronger in the Southwest, Nevada and Arizona, than he is in the industrial Midwest states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin and Michigan.
I want to take a closer look at what happened in Ohio's special election. This was a big surprise of the evening. Former Congressman Bill Johnson resigned last January. The 6th congressional district should have been a landslide for Republicans in the deep red district, but Democrats were able to get 45% of the vote. What type of warning sign is this for Republicans in Ohio?
One of the most interesting things about that result, Julia, is that it seems to some degree to have been a function of an engaged Democratic base and a less engaged Republican base. Turnout was pretty modest, and that seems to have helped the Democrats be at least, well, somewhat competitive, or at least keep the race closer than expected. Now, I think one key question is that about reproductive rights? Is that what is driving Democratic turnout there? Or is there some other issue? But certainly it cuts against the grain of the opinion we hear so often, which is that Republicans are more enthusiastic this year than Democrats.
Yeah, certainly a warning sign for Republicans in a very red-leaning state. Want to switch gears to the other big story of Tuesday. Hunter Biden was just found guilty on 3 felony counts this week related to his federal gun case. He's still facing a federal trial in California on tax charges later this year. Niall, are these charges more serious, and what can we expect from this next trial?
In terms of their seriousness, I mean, we do have to point out the gun charges could, in effect, at a maximum level, lead to 25 years imprisonment. Now, it's highly unlikely that Hunter Biden will be sentenced to anything like that time. The gun that he had briefly. It wasn't used in any other crime. He has no previous record, etc. The tax charges are serious, and I would argue that they may have, at least to some extent, a little bit more of a political ramification, because, of course, the nature of tax is it goes to income. Income goes to business dealings, and it's Hunter Biden's business dealings that Republicans have really sought to make a central issue, accusing the president's son of trading on the family name for profit.
Another big story we're following is related to the Supreme Court. That the High Court has been launched really into a controversy after secret recordings of conservative Justice Samuel Alito were released. Niall, what has the reaction been on both sides of the aisle?
I think the reaction has broken down, frankly, along rather predictable lines. Democrats have been very critical of Justice Alito's comments, where he sort of foregrounded the idea of America as a religious nation, or placing Christianity in particular at the forefront in the United States. Republicans, for their part, are more critical of the way these recordings were made, which was essentially an investigative journalist or an activist, depending on how you want to describe her, making these recordings covertly, and Republicans arguing that that is inherently underhand. For my part, I'm not sure that we're all that surprised by what Justice Alito said. We kind of know he believes these things, whether one likes them or not.
House Republicans are planning to hold a vote to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt. What are the expectations? Do you think the GOP will unite behind this vote?
It's unclear at this point. There has been some reporting suggesting the vote could perhaps be pulled at the very last moment. Of course, this is all a consequence of the math on Capitol Hill, where Republicans have a tiny majority in the House of Representatives. They can only afford to lose 1 or 2 or 3 votes in these matters. They may not get the support they need. I think the expectation is that if their vote counters believe they don't have the support to do this, they'll simply pull the measure from the floor.
So I want to stick with Congress, but go to campaigns. We know Colorado Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert is running in a new district and hoping to sidestep numerous controversies surrounding her personal conduct. Niall, what are the chances this election cycle, her chances this election cycle? Do you think this was a good strategy for her to move to a new district?
In pure electoral terms, it doesn't seem to have been a bad strategy. Now, clearly the Congresswoman is something of a lightning rod for various controversies, and we don't need to sort of relitigate all of those here. But in opinion polls on the Republican primary side, she is leading the field. I would say, Julia, she may be assisted by the fact that it is a multi-candidate field. It's not just Boebert against one Republican challenger. So I think her name recognition, her profile, those are probably particularly advantageous when you have a number of different candidates running.
So we know we're nearing the Republican National Convention, which is taking place in Milwaukee next month, and speculation is continuing to swirl around who former President Trump will pick as his running mate. North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum has risen to the top of that list. Less than a year ago, we know that he was jumping into the presidential primary with very little fanfare. But Niall, how did this relatively, unknown governor by some standards really rise to the top of Trump's sweepstakes?
I think largely because he's seen as a very safe choice. Governor Burgum isn't particularly controversial. He's not particularly, I don't think even his supporters would say he's particularly overburdened with charisma. And so that means that he doesn't really stand a strong possibility of overshadowing former President Trump on the campaign trail or anywhere else. Trump may prefer a choice like that to a more controversial or divisive choice, or even simply a more high-profile, somewhat bombastic choice that, like, say, Senator J.D. Vance. Now, I would say, as you well know, Julia, it's always a bit of a fool's errand predicting what Mr. Trump is going to do at any point. The fact that Doug Burgum has been talked up right now does not remotely mean that the pick is going to end up being Doug Burgum in the end.
Want to move to some breaking news today. Hamas gave mediators its reply to the U.S.-backed proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said the U.S. is evaluating the reply. What's the latest on the ongoing negotiations?
So the Hamas response has requested amendments to the proposal that was put forth. There's a lot of cloudiness around this whole issue, Julia, not least because it is not at all clear from public statements that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is fully supportive of the plan that President Biden laid out, despite the fact that the Biden administration keeps saying that was an Israeli proposal. The Hamas response, we don't really know the granular detail of. We just know there has been this request for amendments. We can surmise that one of Hamas's biggest issues is whether Israel is signed up to a permanent ceasefire if other conditions are met. There's real uncertainty about that.
Niall Stanage, as always, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
A little bit of good news for consumers. Inflation has slowed slightly and prices were flat month over month for the first time in 2 years. New data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows a slight improvement from 3.4% in April to about 3.3% in May. The bad news is it's not back to normal. The inflation rate is still up from the target of about 2%. The Fed is expected to keep interest rates at the same level this month. Former New York City mayor and close Trump advisor Rudy Giuliani may soon lose control of his own finances. Giuliani filed for bankruptcy in December of last year after a $148 million defamation verdict. His creditors have expressed concerns for months that filing for bankruptcy was a tactic to delay the collection on that verdict. They also allege Giuliani has spent egregiously during the bankruptcy process and hid assets from them, including a new business venture called Rudy's Coffee. Now lawyers for his creditors say they plan to take him back to bankruptcy court next week to ask a trustee to take the reins. Changes to Title IX, the law preventing sex discrimination in schools, are being blocked. A federal judge in Texas is halting President Biden's proposed modifications that recommended protections for transgender students. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton sued after the guidance was proposed, hailing the latest decision as a victory against government overreach. The judge says the Biden administration went above its authority with their slated changes. Added protections to the law for student sexual orientation and gender identity is slated to take effect August 1st, pending legal challenges. Some updates on former President Jimmy Carter's condition in hospice care. His grandson, Jason, told Southern Living that the former president is no longer awake every day. Carter joined hospice care in February of 2023. His wife, Rosalind Carter, passed away in November of 2023, 10 months after that. That's it for today's Daily Debrief. I'm Julia Manchester. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.